So what we have here is the all-new, fully redesigned 2018 Ford Expedition. Now this is their big SUV. Like the Lincoln Navigator, which shares a lot of its internals, it's really quite good. Unlike the Navigator though, I think I like the grille and the whole front of this a little bit better. It's a little more tapered, it's not quite as imposing and flat. Under the hood, a 3.5 liter twin turbo V6 that puts out 375 horsepower. Unless you get this, the Platinum trim, which has 400, and that's mated to a 10-speed automatic transmission. So you get a combination of good acceleration off the line as well as good fuel economy up high. Right here, 22-inch wheels. Normally, we're not a fan of wheels that big because they tend to stiffen up the ride a bit, but not so much with this because we have a decent amount of sidewall. Further down the line, we have some nice chrome accents on the mirror caps as well as this bottom of the greenhouse. Otherwise, it's fairly plain on the side, and I'm actually okay with that. One thing that I do really like though, power deployable running boards. With a car this big, it's pretty much a requirement, especially if you have smaller passengers. With a top trim SUV like this, you would expect it to have a hands-free power liftgate, as this does. Now, there's not a whole lot of space back here, just over 19 cubic feet. One thing back here that's also cool, once we fold this up, is this split level cargo organizer. So you drop these tabs here and here, and now you have this nice little barrier so that stuff you have here, whether it's grocery bags or sports equipment, won't come rolling out if you're parked on an incline. It also transforms to a shelf like so, and this glass window here actually flips up so you have added access. The problem is, well, it's a little bit tall, so taller people would not have so much of a problem getting into this area, but shorter people probably not so much. Also, back here we have power folding seats. So now you have the flexibility of cargo and passengers. Another thing that's nice is this negative angle here at the lip of the cargo area. So if you have fruits and cans or something rolling around back here and you're parked on an incline again, probably won't go rolling down. You won't have to chase them going down the street. There's a lot of elements that remind me of the F-150, and that's not entirely a bad thing. It's a nice, angular, almost utilitarian approach to an interior. Materials quality is about what you'd expect from a nicer version of the F-150. Storage, we have some decently sized cup holders here, a slide bin here that has a wireless charging pad as well as 2 USB ports. We have here the Sync 3 infotainment system, which is their latest greatest, and I actually quite like it. Add in standard Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and it's one of the easier systems to use for sure. Audio quality from the B&O system is really quite good as well. Maybe not super high-end audiophile quality, but certainly enough to get some good bass and some nice clear highs as well. On the steering wheel, plenty of useful buttons for cruise control on the left and audio on the right, as well as some voice command buttons as well. The instrument cluster has 2 analog gauges that are flanking a central color display for all your trip computer, fuel economy, as well as a bunch of other information that come in handy as you're driving and even off-roading. The seats themselves are really well shaped and generously padded. In this top trim, we also have ventilation, and a hot day like today, it really proves its worth. After, let's say, several hours of driving this, I can't see a whole lot of fatigue coming from seat comfort. It's one of the better seats that you can get, and in this class, that's saying something. Under my elbow is a massive bin with a sliding tray as well that's removable. You're going to fit a ton of stuff down there. Here in the second row seat, there's plenty of support. They do recline somewhat. That's quite a bit of travel right there. Materials quality, like the front, is also quite nice. I do like this kind of organic stitching they have here. And all of your elbow touch points are really nicely padded. In this trim, we also have a tri-zone climate control back here, a household power outlet, as well as 2 more USB ports. Optionally, they do have some rear entertainment headrests that will either play DVD or even stream from mobile devices. So one good smart feature that they built into this is when you need to access the third row, you just hit the button here and unlocks it. That means that this whole thing slides forward and tilts forward. So if you have a child seat in here, you don't necessarily have to take it out. Of course, you need to take the kid out, but that's a pretty decent pass-through to get to the third row. And it doesn't take that much effort to push it back, so maybe a kid could actually do it on their own. As you'd expect with something this size, the third row space is quite generous. I'm 5'10" and I fit back here just fine. And in general, you're not going to be putting, let's say, adults back here if you don't have to. In a pinch, it is totally fine, and even for, let's say, a longer trip, I'd be totally fine back here too. Now, the materials quality isn't quite as nice as the first two rows. This is a pretty hard elbow touch point here that would get on my nerves after a little while, but these have a power recline, which is unusual, as well as another USB port here and on the other side as well. So you are really well covered. So from behind the wheel of the Expedition, I'm not going to say that it drives like a smaller SUV, but it doesn't drive bad at all. It doesn't feel like it's out of sorts on this winding mountain road. The suspension is doing a really good job of soaking up all the bumps, and you do have the option for adaptive suspension to stiffen things up or soften them up as you see fit. And even right now in the sustained long corner we're in, there's not a whole lot of body roll. It's really well managed. Now, we are riding quite high. You'll feel some undulations, especially with the left to right stuff, because you are riding so high, so it's like being at the end of a whip. Now we get to demonstrate its turning circle. Is it going to need? No. Actually, that's a really small turning circle, so that bodes really well for maneuverability if you're in a tight parking spot. And also if you need to do a bunch of U-turns on residential roads. So probably a lot fewer three-point turns than you'd expect. It's always a good idea to, instead of ride the brakes all the way down, is to shift into a lower gear, let the engine slow you down. So to do that, you hit the M button here in a manual mode, downshift, and there you go. I certainly would prefer to have the buttons on the steering wheel, either on the wheel itself or a paddle behind it, but as seldom as most people will use that, it's fine where they put it. Now we have a rotary selector here for the gears. It's all right. I mean, it takes a little getting used to, but it is better than the push button transmission that you'll find in some other cars. As far as road and wind noise, well, I'm hearing some of both, but they're really not that bad. The stereo is off, so if I were to just turn it up a little bit, it would drown it right out. There's obviously a lot more noise coming through than the Navigator, but this is a good 200 or 300 pounds lighter than the Navigator, so you're going to make up those small inconveniences with fuel economy and drivability. In terms of visibility, well, this A-pillar is pretty thick. In a left turn, these windows are so wide, and that A-pillar is positioned at least well far away so that I'm not having to bob back and forth to see what's on the other side. This B-pillar over my shoulder is pretty thick. If I'm making a lane change, looking over my shoulder, I'm not going to see much. At least the mirrors are wide enough to give you a better idea. Combine that with a blind spot monitor, it takes a lot of that guesswork and stress out of it. And when it comes to towing, the Expedition does it really well. Just over 9,000 pound towing capacity, I believe. And yeah, that's what we like to call best in class. You do have the reverse trailer assists. I don't know about you, but for me, when I'm backing up a trailer into a spot, I break out into a cold sweat. That essentially eliminates all the stress out of it because you're steering with this little dial rather than the steering wheel. It uses cameras and a bunch of other sensors to make sure that you're backing it right into where you want. It's a smart feature, not particularly new, but I really love it nonetheless. So I've spent quite a bit of time in this, the 2018 Ford Expedition, and I have to say I quite like it. There aren't a lot of SUVs that compete with this at this scale, the most notable being the Chevy Suburban. And I would take this over the Suburban pretty much in an instant. There are far less things you have to worry about as far as cargo space. The Suburban has kind of a 3-inch lift that you have to get over, and the ride quality isn't nearly as nice as this either. There are also quite a bit more features that you can get with the Expedition. Well, that's obviously a case of this coming out now versus 3 years ago when the Suburban did. But all in all, I really quite like it. It drives great. The pricing is pretty reasonable considering the size of the car, starting around $50,000 for the base model all the way up to about $80,000 for the top trim like this. Compared to the Lincoln Navigator, on which they share a mutual platform, there's not a whole lot difference as far as engine, transmission, all that stuff, but the Lincoln Navigator certainly has more style and bling. This is a lot more utilitarian and useful, but it's also $20,000 less when you're talking about trim levels from bottom to top. Now, if you are considering either of them, honestly, it's going to come down to your budget. How much bling do you really want? For more information on the Expedition as well as its competition, head over to Edmunds.com. And if you want to see more videos like this, hit subscribe.